Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I am Sean Sweeney. I'm the Director of Operations at the Center for Nonprofit Advancement. I'm excited to say that the center has very recently wrapped up this year's Board Leadership Award process for 2025. And, we're here today because each year we release a series of best practice learning videos to highlight innovative and replicable best practices that we learned from our finalists throughout the process. So before you meet them, and before we get into the real kind of topic of this particular video, I want to first introduce Anne Schrantz, who is with the awards presenting sponsor, Cohn Resnick. Anne, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. My name is Ann Schrantz. I'm with Cohn Resnick. We're an audit and accounting and advisory firm here in the Washington area and around the country who specialize with nonprofit organizations. And we've been very happy to partner with the Center for Nonprofit Advancement for several years from inception on the Board Governance Award. As auditors and tax providers, we really feel like board governance in the nonprofit space is really critical at helping the organizations fulfill their missions in a productive and um, uh, well-governed way. So we want to thank everyone for joining us on this. And we're very happy today to have our winners with us from CARECEN, Melecio Rivera and Abel Nunez. We want to thank you guys so much for participating and for being part of the award and for sharing your best practices today. And I also would be remiss if I didn't thank Sean specifically for all the great work that he's done on the award, as well as our selection committee. They really pour their heart and soul into the process, and we couldn't do it without them. So I want to thank them and turn it back to Sean to have a great conversation with our winner from CARECEN. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Anne. Thanks so much for being here. And of course, to Cohn Resnick for its continued sponsorship of the award. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump into our video today. So as Anne mentioned, we're joined by our winners this year, and specifically with Board Chair Melecio Rivera and the Executive Director of CARECEN, Abel Nunez. And of course, congratulations again to CARECEN for being the winner this year. So today's topic is being strategic while meeting the moment. So in this video, we're going to discuss how CARECEN's board was able to meet the moment during a migrant crisis here in DC a couple of years ago. More specifically, I want to talk about how they were able to provide strategic leadership and keep executive limitations in place while, also being nimble and allowing the organization to take on some risk and to provide assistance to, already their existing constituents, but also those who are new to the area. So Melecio and Abel, thanks so much for joining us today. Our first question is really, I'm hoping you can kind of just set the scene for us. I'm sure, we kind of remember what was happening. It was only a couple years ago, but can you just kind of talk to us about the arrival of migrant buses to the area a couple years ago and what were the needs facing the people who were brought into the area? And kind of, I guess, more specifically, what aspect of CARECEN's mission was instrumental in getting your organization involved, at the start of the whole process?
Yeah, I can start, Melissa, if you want, and then you can sort of add the board perspective. Um, when it first started, actually got a call from city government that they had gotten some information that there was going to be a bus coming in with migrants from the state of Texas. And sure enough, it was true. And so they asked us, what we can do. Just to set the context at that time, the city did not have any infrastructure for receiving recent arrivals, right? So there's a difference between serving immigrants and serving people that just cross the border, particularly folks that are seeking, protection from the U.S. via asylum. And so, they called, and we responded because we thought it was a one and done, right? We felt that it was a political stunt that the politics of the day were encouraging, and so we still needed to help the people that were on the bus. There were not a large number. I think the first bus had maybe 14 people that came, and so our role was to just give them a quick orientation, figure out what their immediate needs were, and then help them on their way. And we thought that they were going to send maybe one, two buses. There's going to be some political, publicity, sort of press conferences done by both sides, and then that was going to be it, right? But we were really surprised that the governor of Texas continued to send buses. And once the buses sort of started coming, it developed sort of a pattern of people understanding that in the one hand they were being received well in DC, and so a lot of the migrants that had no idea what services they could find in this nation realized that getting on the bus was a good idea, and so they started coming. And so we at that point sort of switched and said, okay, this is not one or two buses. This is now consistent buses that we need to be out there. Just to give you a sense, during a period from April to July, I had a quarter of my staff at Union Station receiving the buses without any infrastructure. We didn't have respite centers. We didn't have any of that. So it was just our skill set. I think part of the reason that CARECEN got involved, one, not only its mission, but its history. So CARECEN was created by a group of migrants coming into the region, Salvadoran immigrants, kind of not understanding what was here in the area. And CARECEN was created to help them navigate that, right? And so whether it was immigration legal help, whether it was housing help, or anything that they needed to begin their process of integration. So for us, it was, well, this is just the next community that's coming in. And so our history mandated that we were there. But when you look at our mission, our mission states at the back end of the mission, it's like, work on empowerment and human rights advocacy, and those mix really well because a lot of these things sort of fit all of that, and so it was in line with our mission. Not that we were serving a specific community from a specific country, is the fact that people were coming in, they were fleeing oppression, violence, and they needed support as they were coming into this country. It is why we were created, and so from a certain perspective, we were now paying it forward. An organization that has existed now for 40 years, and now you have this new wave of people coming in, and we felt the duty to be there. And so that's what it was. But it was scary because we didn't know what was it going to be turned out. There was no infrastructure to support, so we were really creating things in the moment as we were trying to provide resources. And again, there are communities that in the border states that have a long history of receiving recent migrants, but in the interior of the country, that's not something that many organizations do. We get immigrants once they've been here for a while, but this is the first time that since our inception that we began to receive recent migrants to the region.
If if I may add, Abel informed us that at first I don't the first few days probably the board wasn't aware that this had started because as Abel is saying, they didn't think this was going to go on for as long as it did.
Mhm.
But then, we found out that the people arriving, were from kind of newer immigrant groups to the area, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, some African countries, arrivals from Mali, Congo, Nigeria. And of course, the board was interested in ensuring that Carecen's umbrella continued to expand in that sense of offering this welcoming service to more people in newer communities. Bell explained that a lot of staff was going over there to welcome people at odd hours of the night or the morning. It was still the pandemic. So, the board had concerns about that and the things that these people needed were kind of directions like where do I go next? Where can I sleep tonight? And this is where Carecen started, even using some of its funds to buy bus tickets and train tickets to get people to their next destination. And so this is what we were aware of at that time, and that the number of people were continued to grow, and buses started coming from different states too, not just Texas, but Arizona. I don't remember if we got buses from Florida here, but probably. Um, so this situation kind of kept growing, and that's kind of where we were at that point. I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks so much, both of you, for, really kind of setting us up for the rest of the conversation with that. So actually, Melissa, you kind of just mentioned this, but, all of this work immediately involved an increase in both services you were providing and maybe you were providing services you hadn't before. And then, of course, the expenses incurred to provide those services. So, what do you think was the key in kind of your already existing board governance and leadership that led to the ability of the organization to be flexible and to feel comfortable to start, spending money that wasn't budgeted for the year? And I guess that's kind of one, that's maybe the second A, and the second B question is, I think one thing we talked about during the process was how the board also kind of saw this as a chance to be strategic. So how was the board strategic in its handling of the situation?
Yeah, so I'll say one of the first concerns was that a lot of staff was being diverted from regular Caresen operations, and so um, I'll say it was the key to everything. I'd say was the communication that Abel has with myself personally and with the board, in that he was keeping us abreast of how this was developing, right? And he quickly identified what some of the financial issues could come up, and then we as a board took a look at the budget, and which we have regular reports on and regular committee meetings to discuss financial matters. Monthly, finance committee meets quarterly. The board gets a report with update on how we're doing on the budget and what are expectations of potential future financial inflows that we may not have expected at the beginning of the year, for example. Um, Combined with that, we have our strategic plan, which the board develops. The board development committee within the board leads and develops along with staff and the board and external stakeholders. And so when these things were happening, it was important for us to kind of focus on these two areas. You were talking about how are we strategic? Well, we did have a strategic plan that had certain areas of focus, mostly focused on the programs we already have and we're growing. So that kind of set some guardrails of we're okay doing some things up to here, but maybe not beyond that. And financially, um, Abel gave us the confidence in our in projections and expectations of budgeting that we could handle, and we were going to be able to cover some of the expenses that we were incurring at that time. And so it led to board discussions, but we felt like we had these two big pillars to kind of lean on and kind of help the board guide us forward. Abel, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from one of the key components was that continued communication. So there are the structure meetings that we have. We meet quarterly, the committees meet within that, and we were using those. But I was in constant contact with Melecio, right, as my conduit to the board. So, on the ground, we move faster. The board moves sometimes slower because they're not day-to-day operations. And so my role was to inform them both of the challenges that we were facing, the the challenges that the migrants were facing, but also the opportunities, right? So in every crisis, there are things that can hurt you, but there are things that can make you stronger. And both existed in that space. And my role was to communicate both to the board because it was just about, can I have the authorization to spend money that I have no idea how I'm going to get back? That I don't know that would have the board would have felt comfortable and they probably would have limited my ability to kind of continue doing this work. But I was also telling them, hey, I'm getting, um, you know, reached out by different foundations that normally have never talked to us. So there was you could see that as we were doing the work, besides ensuring that the migrants got the best reception possible, there was other relationships that were being created with city officials, with foundations that I knew had a longer impact for the organization beyond the moment of the service that we were providing at the time. And so those were conversations I was having with Melecio because it is scary for you to start spending money that was not budgeted, and there wasn't necessarily a funding source that was attached to it because funding cycles take a year to establish. So we were basically, I mean, just give you a sense, there were days that we would spend $10,000 just in transportation alone, like bus tickets and things
Wow.
like that. Several times the bank had to like shut down our credit card because we had reached the limit, right? And so um, I wasn't sharing every little detail because I was sharing the highlights to Melecio, but I also was sharing them the potential good outcomes for Carecen in terms of funding. I think we were going to have the capacity to identify new funding sources specifically for this work. We were also working with the city to begin to create an infrastructure that didn't exist before, right? So the level of the deepening of that relationship with the city would have not happened if not for this moment because it was impacting everyone. And so my was to, yes, provide a service to a community that needed it, but to also understand like everything that went to it, the funding, the political relationships, and then making sure that the board understood that so that we were not going to be in a deficit after this, but that we were actually going to be in a stronger position for that. And then, for the staff level to be able to participate that and feel that they were really having an impact, an immediate impact was incredible. I think it solidified the team and saying, Carecen is really stepping it up, and they had a pride in terms of what we were doing. Because remember, there were only two formal organizations that were responding to it. It was like Catholic Charities, and it was Carecen. Everybody else were just kind of volunteers and mutual aid groups that are smaller. And so we were the only formal organizations that were on the scene. There were other groups on the peripheral, but we were taking the brunt of it. And my sort of the the fact that I had the approval of the board, I didn't have to second guess. Oh my God, am I going over? Like I actually knew what my parameters were. I mean, if at any time Melecio and the board would have been like, we're concerned, we want to talk to you, we would have had that conversation and figure it out. But the information that we're sharing gave them the confidence to trust my judgment as this thing was developing.
Great, great. And yeah, we'll talk more about that too. Oh, Melissa, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, and I think the results for the board were immediate. I mean, we were getting updates of what was happening, but soon after, Carecen Annabelle was being called by the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, national news outlets on TV, Univision. They wanted to hear what was happening, what they were seeing, and we could see, and it was easy to show the rest of the board the impact that this was having and how it was affecting the reputation and the profile of the organization, which I think had positive impacts. And I think this kind of may lead into your next question.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, Melissa. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about reputation in a second, but I wanted to kind of just like call out a couple of key items I think I'm taking away from the answer to that question. Two things. One of them being, it's important to have these guardrails already in place for an organization because it'll make things easier to meet a moment. So, you mentioned how you had a strategic plan, so you knew how to operate within the bounds of that. Potentially, like you said, maybe go past it a little bit, but keeping your eye on the kind of the end goals that you had already set aside in the strategic plan. And also, you already had really strong communication, which I think is super important, especially between a board chair and executive director, but also, communications between um, the executive team and the board, the whole board in general too. So yeah, thank you for that. And I will also actually call out to Bell, you mentioned how it was an opportunity for potential growth, building relationships and strengthening the pre-existing relationships that you already had. Just kind of, again, keeping your eye on the fact that this is a moment that's going to hopefully be temporary and you're going to make it through, but also thinking forward and how is it sustainable and stuff like that. So thank you both for mentioning those things. And yeah, Melecio, like you said, moving into our next question, when you're working in a situation that is potentially going to have very public impact, which you've mentioned, I want to talk about risk management from board perspective. So both from an organizational management and capacity standpoint, you've already mentioned too that, your staff was out there kind of all hours of the day to help out, but also reputationally, which you've mentioned, Alessio. So what were the board conversations like around how to meet and or mitigate some of these risks that came up?
Yeah, I mean, I referenced a strategic plan. I think that was key because in this specific instance, one of the calls Abel made, this is months into this situation. Once we had connected with other organizations, and as he mentioned, there was this need to build this infrastructure to receive migrants, which we didn't have. He said, Melecio, we're getting calls about getting federal funds to start and manage the welcome center and the shelter for the immigrants. And this once you get into something like that, that was way beyond what the board had envisioned. And at that point, when we discussed with the board, we felt that that was maybe going a bit too far in terms of our immediate mission and the risk management that we could handle in terms of stepping into what it means to get into federal contracts and all of that. And Abel was very clear, and he informed himself very well about what this could entail, what it would mean. And at the same time, he had already thought and identified other organizations that may be better suited than Carecen for taking this on. So in that sense, we referenced our strategic plan. Again, we looked at the a program of that magnitude, what it would require in terms of staffing for ensuring that we had enough people supporting Abel with financial accounting, this operational structure that would probably be needed, and that at that time we didn't have, and it wasn't really in the works. Um, so we thought that maybe that was gonna take us a bit too far. Um, and then the other thing was always, and not that Abel would ever forget, but always kind of reminding him, Abel, what if we have all the staff out there, who's minding the shop? Who's picking up the phones and continuing with the work with the legal program, answering questions on housing? How's the citizenship program continuing? And ensuring that was always that we weren't distracted by this immediate crisis only and left the rest of the services aside. And with that, I think Abel has always also provided good communication with, if needed, with program directors who were able to, and he updates the board on each program's developments and metrics of how many people are coming in, how much fees are being collected, etc. So it gave the board confidence that this wasn't changing, even though all this was going on. And I think that helped to manage that risk of kind of dispersing ourselves too thin. Abel, please.
Yeah, no, no. I would add is, you know, if you have good communications with your board, you have a good strategic plan, then you know what your rubric of work is, right? So receiving the migrants was within our mission, was within the work. I mean, it was new work because we weren't doing it, but like managing a center was something outside of a wheelbarrow. And it was clear to us. So that because we took leadership, people thought we then needed to do everything. And you could easily see how you can move to that because there were funds attached to it. It wasn't like they were asking us to do it again. The immediate response was kind of on our dime, but this other infrastructure had resources attached to it, and you could run the risk of chasing the money, right? Because you said, well, we can do it, but you know, my conversation with Melecio was like, well, we have never run a shelter, and there are specific capacities that you must have or skill sets that you must have within your organization to do those things. And so it was easy to walk away and not feel, because there were pressures from government, from other partners. You got to do it. You're already in the like in the mix, and it's like no, we need to identify the best partner because in the end, again, and you go back to mission. So if our mission is to empower, the immigrant community, well, by us doing this work, we could actually disempower them because we could do a bad job. And so that it wasn't that we were afraid of doing a bad job, but like there were other groups that could do a better job than us because that was their mission, running shelters. And so we were able to identify groups that could do that. And we understood our place in the entirety of the effort, right? And again, that was something that was shared with the board. The board gave me feedback. And so I was never afraid to walk away from something. So it wasn't like the board said, "Oh my God, you walked away from, a potential new funder." As it was never about that. It was like, yeah, that is the right thing to do. And there was another partner of ours that was helping us that actually took on the role of running the shelter, which was the best decision for us. Because there was a moment that we needed to kind of walk away and return back to our sort of core programming, you know, uh, and feel good about that and saying that we weren't abandoning the immigrants that were coming in. We were in a new phase, and we helped shepherd that into existence. And so again, this is where having those guardrails help, right? Because if you don't have the communication as an executive director, you can kind of just go for it, and then there's this saying, it's like sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness and not permission. Well, I think that that's not a good attitude to have with your board. I think with your board, you got to ask permission first and then execute. And it's because there are legal implications for it. There are reputational implications for all of it. And I think that their role is to make sure, because they have a much different view. Like when you're in the work, sometimes you get so caught up that you need this sounding board that can, for lack of, I don't know, it would be a bad metaphor, but for you to stop just watching a tree and look at the forest. Right. So that's the conversation you have with the board. Okay. Long term, what does this mean for us? Is it aligning? Have you thought about this? Because it helps you then think, I'm in the right space, and they also feel confident that I was leading the work in a way that met with their expectations as well.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. I think that what you brought up here is kind of like the balance between, you're the expert in the day-to-day stuff. You know exactly what the organization needs, but they're there and by them, I mean the board, they're there to, like you said, not miss the forest for the trees, and like making sure you're thinking long term and not just getting stuck on those small details. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. There was something else I wanted to mention that was great in your answer. I wanted to call up, but now I'm forgetting it. Maybe I'll think of it later. But I want to talk for our final point about what you just mentioned, Abel, which is kind of like asking for permission from the board, and acting within a concept that we call executive limitations. So um, one thing that I think is really hard for some boards who are blessed with an amazing leader like you, Abel, in the chief executive role, is actually the fact that the chief executive is, or I should say, the board is the boss, right, of the chief executive, and um, the board needs to make sure that that person in the role is operating under their guidance and their direction. So I guess to kind of bring it back to the crisis at hand, in this moment of like, needing to make quick decisions and act decisively, um, how do you keep this in mind, and how do you keep lines of communication open to make sure that, no one was stepping on anyone's toes, but also that you were still getting the job done, basically?
So I'll start from my perspective, and then Melissa can share it. I think that it has to be a practice in the organization. You can't just expect that you're responding to a crisis and somehow this is going to happen. So again, we Melecio and I try to have conversations, constant check-ins with each other, even before the crisis. Like that was just our practice. And so, he asked me how things are happening, how the staff is going. I tell him things that I'm seeing, opportunities or threats that the organization may be having. And those conversations are one-on-one. If anything rises to the level where the executive committee needs to be brought in because now it's more formal, either the opportunity or the threat is more formal, then Melecio, sort of shepherds in the board, whether that's the executive committee, whether that's other committees or the full board. And so, but that's a practice that we have already. And so if you don't put these communication practices in place as your general operating apparatus, then you can't expect that in a crisis you'll be able to do that. And so, as a matter of fact, I think it's the opposite. In a crisis, we'll all go to our comfortable corners and operate from there. And I think that it could set up for the board feeling alienated, or the executive feeling that their hands are being tied, versus a place, and the ideal of any boss is to help you flourish, that we have clear boundaries of what I can do and how I can grow. And if anything changes, my first responsibility is to go back to my boss, right? Melecio is the representative of that, and say, this is what I'm seeing. Can I take a step into that? Their job is to be like, well, maybe no. Or, well, yes, but cautiously. Or, yes, but inform us more. And so, again, that is a practice that must exist in your way and your day-to-day operations with your board, um, because if it doesn't happen, you're not gonna really be able to do that in a crisis.
So I'll echo Abel's highlighting of the constant communication that we keep. I'll say that as a board, like you said, we're lucky to have a leader like Abel, and that in a way brings some risks because I guess we trust a lot in his suggestions, decision making, but at the same time, in the many years that I've been working with him, and because we have this open communication, I've never felt uh, I've always felt like it's two ways, and it's okay for me to question things. It's okay for me to say, Abel, why don't we raise this with the rest of the board? How about you send an email to everybody, see if anybody has any thoughts? Or Abel, look, how about we have a few lawyers on our board? It's DC. How about we get some of these guys on a call tomorrow and we can discuss this idea, right? Or look, we have somebody on the board that has union contacts. Let's run this idea by them. And because we've had this great relationship, he's always been open to this, and it's never turned into anything confrontational. It's the complete opposite. It's always an open discussion, always finding ways to improve, maybe an idea or a suggestion, or raising risks that maybe we hadn't thought of, or asking Abel to address those risks before doing something. And and this has, I guess, what may seem like an open freeway of ideas and discussions is ultimately what serves as the guardrail for the things that Abel does, because it's we're always just communicating so we know what's going on. And if the board is aware and feels comfortable with things that are going on, then I think it gives the director and staff an opportunity to thrive while the board feels comfortable that it's doing its fiduciary duty with the organization and its stakeholders.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. And actually, I think I remember my previous point, and that I think is actually perfect tie into what you're saying here, Melecio, too, which is that, talking about being asked to open that shelter or to facilitate that and be the leaders on it. It's easy, I think, to find yourself in a position where, it's attached to dollars. And why wouldn't you want those dollars? And having this open communication on the board ensures that, you're not going to move past your capacity and into something that you don't have any experience in. And, potentially play with that mission creep moment of like following money that's going to take you away from the basics of your mission. So yeah, having these communication channels open already is going to be super helpful in just making sure that you're staying where you need to be, and but still having the flexibility to kind of follow things where you might want to. Well, thank you so much, Abel and Melecio, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and, of course, offering this peek under the hood of how CARECEN's board leadership functions. So thank you very much for that. I do want to say congratulations. Oh, sorry, Abel, go ahead.
I just want to add one piece, right? So as I'm thinking that hopefully this serves other organizations. As an executive director, that means that when we talk about open communications, it's not just a statement, but that it is followed. So that means that in your calendar, you have to put this stuff in your calendar, right? Like you have to create the actually infrastructure for those communications to happen. Because if you don't, then what happens is that, oh yeah, I'm gonna call him tomorrow. Oh yeah, I'm gonna call him tomorrow. So what I would say to other executive directors is, or CEOs, it's like that's part of your work. So you have to put in like calendar, block up times in your calendar to do this and invest the time to speak. Because sometimes you may speak about deep things. Sometimes it might be a quick 15-minute call, like everything is fine, there's no really news. But if I don't have it in my calendar, we are so busy in our day to day, and Melesio is busy in his day to day job. So we're making that effort to make sure. And so I just want to make sure that it's clear that this is structural. You have to put it into the structure of your work, or it will not happen. You can have the best intentions to be like, I want to have my one-on-one with my board chair, but if you don't schedule it, or if you don't make the time and you don't put it structurally into your day, into your calendar, it will not happen. We are just too busy to do that, and so the commitment is not enough. It's actually the actual nuts and bolts of having a calendar invite and to do all that stuff.
Awesome. That's a great piece of advice, Abel. Thanks for that. And yeah, I completely agree. I'm the type of person who I tend to push things off, but like if it's on my calendar, I'm doing it. So that's a perfect piece of advice. Thanks for mentioning that. But yeah, thank you again so much to both of you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And again, congratulations to CARECEN's board on winning this year's award. And to everyone watching, keep an eye out for another couple of videos for best practices for this year's award process. But again, thank you so much, Melecio and Abel. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean and team.